Welcome back to season 3 of the Extraordinary Leaders podcast. I am so excited about this season because it is coming out in conjunction with my book, The Extraordinary Leader. And in this book, much like the podcast, there are tactics on how we can add extra into our ordinary spaces. Now, don't forget, when I say we are ordinary, I don't mean that in some average, boring way, but I want us to camp around this concept of it's okay to be a normal human being. We don't all have to be smashing it and be extraordinary in our leadership spaces, but we do have to dial into the fact that we are doing it as ordinary people, and we have binary finite resources. We have blinkered thoughts that get in the way of us being expansive. And so my book and this podcast is pulling upon extra thoughts, extra ideas borrowed from other places that we can add into our ordinary, and we might by accident become something quite extraordinary. Something I'm really excited about with this series is that my guests are a little different. Yes, I've got my normal roster of fantastic thought leaders, leadership experts, and brilliant leadership coaches, but I've also got some guests that are from entirely different spaces. To name a few, we've got a gardener, we've got a fisherman, we've got a marketing expert, amongst others. And the reason I wanted to borrow from these spaces and voices is because I think leadership is a little bit binary. We think it all comes from leadership consultancy, but what are we missing that's already out there in the world that we're not pulling upon? So this season, I want you to really expand your mindset of what leadership could be, different paradigms, new exciting spaces to explore. So let's hop in to this week's episode and see where it takes us. This week, we've got Noa Maxwell joining us on the Extraordinary Leaders podcast. Now, Noa is a personal impact coach and an executive presence coach. I mean, what does that even mean? It sounds amazing, right? He has such a brilliant background in and experience in communication. And it's from that space of communicating in the round, from speaking to presenting to listening to storytelling, that Noa's expertise really helps businesses. And something that Noa talks about, in addition to storytelling and how important that is in leadership to communicate effectively, he talks about two different polarities that we can hold together. And yes, you know, that's my favorite thing, holding two opposing truths in tension. He talks about authenticity, which is the holy grail in leadership now. There are so many books on authenticity, but also authority. How do we hold those two things together in our leadership, and how do we communicate from that space as we lead ourselves, our teams, and those around us? So Noa, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Extraordinary Leaders podcast today. How are you doing?
I'm doing really well. Happy Friday. Happy to see you.
Well, that is so nice. And we've had just a bit of a funny chat about how we're probably the same age, but I've just pipped you by being a millennial, and it proves it because my earpods don't have the long cable hanging out of them. And yours do, which definitely puts you in a different generation.
It's so much reassuring. I can see where I'm plugged into, which gives me huge reassurance. Whereas you could end up being plugged into, well, in fact, what happens to me when I wear those is my wife then borrows them, walks out the door and takes my clients with her. So that's why here I'm reassured.
Do you know what? There's something about being tethered to reality that you've got going on with your earphones, whereas you're right, I'm just sort of orbiting all sorts of conversations with my wireless ones. So Noa, let's kick off with my fun question of what does extraordinary leadership mean to you?
Well, I like your title. I looked at it and thought about it, and the immediate response I had to extraordinary was the emphasis on ordinary, and I felt, what a relief. And so on a personal level, I trained as an actor, and I've been doing this job now, personal impact, for 25 years. And I often have a voice in my head, which is, you better be amazing. You better prove yourself. You better be extraordinary. And generally, that gets in the way of just being human and actually all the more useful things that come with being ordinary. So that was my first response to extraordinary, and that's certainly what I would apply as leadership, as coaching, of stop trying to be extraordinary or any other version of that, and be a bit human.
That's what I love about the word ordinary. I mean, it's just to kind of, I talk about shoulders up or shoulders down.
Yeah.
When we're trying to be extraordinary, it's kind of, and actually everyone has, it'd be interesting to talk about this personal brand, personal impact, which is your speciality. But even just conversations around our impact and our personal selves can give us that shoulders up experience of like, oh, I've got to strive, I've got to be extraordinary, I've got to be someone and something. And actually, shoulders down.
Yeah.
I'm ordinary. Yeah. And that's okay. Which is a quest we're all on to fully embrace. So what you do is you specialize in personal impact. What is that?
Yeah. Well, the first thing to say is personal impact as a title is good because it covers the whole lot, which is you and me relating right now, through to an interview, through to a pitch, through to a great stand-up public address, big speaking conference thing. And anywhere in between, we are making an impact. We're making an impact physically, we're making an impact vocally, and we're making an impact emotionally. So personal impact is massive, it's huge. And when you talk about shoulders up and being tense, some of it is just about the energy that we bring into a room or a call. And some of it, I'm now talking about the sort of major things we work on. And some of the things is about telling a story that's compelling. So personal impact is just, where you need to connect.
So with personal impact, I mean, this is something that it's not my honed in area, but it's an area I touch on. So I really value it, but it sometimes feels a little bit binary, like I've either got it or I haven't. A little bit, you've got good impact, personal impact, or you haven't. But it's probably more of a spectrum, a journey, isn't it? So how do we know what our personal impact is like?
I think we feel it, don't we? I think we can feel when somebody is real, and we can feel when we ourselves are real. I think there is a huge amount of trying to be something we think we ought to be. So certainly when I first started doing this work, I was quite young. I was maybe 27, and I was working with quite senior partner level type people. And I wanted to be taken seriously, so would try to be very serious and try to be credible and try to be professional. And that's probably the thing I see most in my own clients, is that trying to be what we think someone expects us to be. And that's why I come back to the relief of the extraordinary, that actually what we need to be able to relate to is somebody that's authentic, somebody that's real.
It's funny though, because we often judge ourselves by our intentions, I always think. So rather than our actual impact, like what it's like being on the other side of ourselves. So if my intention is to be taken seriously today, I will judge my impact based on that intention versus actually what's it like on the other side of me.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
So how would you help someone get into that space of seeing actually what the reality of their impact is like?
So I love your point about rather than thinking about what we're being, it's thinking about how does this land on the other side.
Yeah.
A lot of the work I do is around storytelling and saying, what's Dolly's story? So this podcast is here for you to be able to support your clients in a myriad of different ways. So rather than me sitting here thinking I have to, Noah, be funny or amazing or insightful or all of those things, that how I would advise my clients and me to deal with that is to say, actually, what's the output for Dolly? What's the end of the story? What's the goal? And that's what stories are all about. What's the end that you want to reach? And then you can work backwards and say, so in order to do that, what are the challenges to overcome? How do we help with that?
Interesting. So let's touch on storytelling, because it's something that I've never sat in on any storytelling workshop or any storytelling within business. So and we can use the podcast as an example, although help, because I don't know how. I'm just kind of rolling with it, baby. Um, but what is why do we need the presence of understanding storytelling in business?
The first thing I'd say is storytelling is kind of, we know, humans know, it's the number one way to land a message. So Bible, Quran, any religious teaching, Saatchi and Saatchi, advertisers, anyone is going to go, how do I take this message to get to land in a way? So storytelling has a way of reaching bits of our brain that others can't. I think what tends to happen in business is we're trained to be so kind of super logical that innate human ability to tell stories, which is what humans have always done. So I don't think you need to have been on a great load of storytelling workshops to know about storytelling, because it's in you. It's in you from a child onwards. But I think when we get into business, we start to get quite all the things that begin with L: logical, linear, literal, and left-brained.
Wow.
And I think stories are a way of coming back to how do we engage people, not just intellectually, but emotionally.
Yeah. It's funny because you're so right. Story pulls us out of a rather one-dimensional space, but that one-dimensional space, the logical, the linear, is the science side. It's the data side, and it's the side that almost it seems to have more gravitas in business. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, well, it matters, doesn't it? I mean, it's not that it doesn't matter. I think possibly you could argue that's the bit that makes humans particularly different from other animals, is that we have got this ability to use that frontal lobe and be very logical. Yesterday I was working with a private equity client, and that's all they do. I remember the first time I ever met a private equity client, I remember having a kind of version of this discussion. And I remember the partner just turned to me and went, "But what has emotion got to do with this? It's nothing to do with feeling. What is that? Why would I need feeling? We don't do that." And I kind of get it. Logic is what has made private equity successful, is what made, a human able to concoct an amazing watch, or whatever that is. So it's not to say it's not important. What it is to say is we can't build a relationship just on that. So the feeling, the trust that you and me have to have for each other has to also factor in a feeling and an emotion of, do I like you? Do I trust you? Do I buy you? Are you real? And if all we're going to present is our logical linear stuff, it's going to be quite hard to do that.
I completely agree. And from my own personal experience, but also just from the humans I've interacted with, but also just going back to your private equity client. And I know that I've been with boards or groups of professionals who are all quite happy to stay in that linear space and not really want or feel the need for anything beyond that. It's seen as emotional, non-professional, unnecessary, and they're fine just being quite transactional. So, yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's there whether they know it or not. So it's I mean, there's a spectrum of emotion, isn't there, and what emotion you choose to show. But even if you're saying, hey, we've got no emotion in this room, we're being logical, there will be a dominant alpha male sounding very confident. There will be a challenging young buck trying to push that. There will be, there'll be all sorts of emotional dynamics actually kicking in, saying we've got no emotion in here. So for me, it's more like just you accept it is going to be there, and then you can start to work with, well, what feeling do you want in the room? What do you actually want to express? Because do you want to just express, I'm an alpha?
You've said a really interesting word there, which I think is really key, which is dynamics. because relational dynamics are there, whether you're cerebral, right brain, left brain heavy, whatever it is, there's always a dynamic, isn't there? So that is wherein lies the human response, a hormonal response, which is an emotional response to data around you. So what do you find if you were to do a kind of before and after working with a leader or an exec team or who you work with? What's the kind of before and after for them? Why would they get you in? And what value do you add and how do you add it?
I've recently worked with a team on a big pitch, and these guys are auditors.
Oh.
And look, it's funny, I still remember when I was at drama school, there was one of those weird cartoons on the canteen wall, and it said, there I was in the middle of a successful acting career when the accounting bug got me. And it's sort of, it's so weird that my biggest client base by far are accountants. I mean,
that doesn't surprise me, because they probably need dialing up in this area.
Well, maybe. I mean, I really like them because there's also something very humble. But I think there is a humility of like, maybe we can do things differently a bit.
Nice.
So I'm working with them on a really, really big pitch. Annoyingly, the whole of this pitch has been online, which has been its own frustration. But that's the way it is. So what's the before? The before is 5 partners sit in a row and basically tell you what their CVs are and get quite, you talked about kind of shutting down, get quite energetically closed as they describe their credentials and maybe showcase a little bit of their expertise around robust auditing and whatever the latest regulation that is coming in. Okay, so that would be the before. What we would try and do over the course of many painful online sessions is first of all work out what's the story of your client that you're pitching to. So suddenly there's a little bit of relief. So if the story of your client is they want to get to this dream place, in order to get there, they're going to have to go through this massive, complicated, horrible transition and transformation. So these guys here, these 5 partners, they've seen a lot. They've done a lot of things a bit like that. So if they can start to tell stories about, here's some other mountains I've climbed, this is what it felt like, this is what you'll experience, and this is what I'd advise you at this point, suddenly we've got 5 storytellers with a red thread of where this company's going. And with any luck, it can become a conversation with a client rather than me reciting my expertise and CV.
I'm just thinking from a personal perspective, personal point of view, I would love people to do that who are in that space. So, you know, from accountancy to law to really skill litigations, sort of risk assessment type places. That's not my speciality. It's quite overwhelming when you're trying to buy into that. But actually, if there was a story of pulling you through rather than just being told all the credentials and the data, it would be, I'm just thinking it would be so much better. But why would it be so much better for me? And it's probably because I'd feel a little bit more held and carried through. Rather than sort of having to manage all that information myself and process it like I'm a computer. Yeah, it does. It kind of, it's like a guide, isn't it? A storytelling, the storytelling guides you through something that might be quite difficult.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I suspect, Dolly, you know, that I think that's what good advisors do, isn't it? I'm sure that is what you're doing with your clients, and I'm sure, you know, I think when we're in good hands, that is what we feel. We do feel that there's an understanding of someone's taking the time to listen to where we want to go, what we want to be, where we're heading.
Yeah, it is, because actually I've got some external contractors that work for me doing various things, and actually I've sometimes the relationship hasn't worked out because of that, because it hasn't felt like there's been a story or an arc that has carried me through, and it's felt, you know, legal advice, for example, it just feels like, gosh, I'm just paying you money to just say stuff at me. Ugh, what's the point? And so then that goes back to the old adage of people by people.
Yeah.
And actually you want a person and you can get the skill out of them somehow, some way. But if you've got the person, they're carrying you through as in relationship, isn't it? Relationship's a story, I suppose, in some senses.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's just, it's kind of counterintuitive because we've all got a level of insecurity for whatever reason. Am I clever enough? Am I meant to be here? Am I going to be found out in some shape or form?
Yeah.
And so our default position is to go to our content, our expertise, and just dump it.
Yeah.
And we all do it. I mean, I'm totally guilty of it. So I think somehow that's the bit of widening your gaze a bit, as you started, widening your gaze a bit and going, okay, maybe I don't have to be this extraordinary person. Maybe I can just be ordinary and ask and listen.
Yeah. It's quite basic stuff at the end of the day, but the best things are always basic. Yeah. So thinking about personal impact, so you bring that into story. So one of the main bullet points of that, of taking people through story, is to recognize the story of their client. And so when they've done that, they're creating a level of empathy and can then speak into that space. Then what comes next? How do you then take a team like that auditing group for the presentation? What comes next?
So then once I'm back into my metaphor, by the way, which is one aspect of stories I love.
Go on.
I'm not quite, we can come back to that. But in my metaphor, okay, they've set out the mountain ahead, right? This is where the client, want to get to. Mm-hmm. These are the scale of the challenges. And now we're going to share our experiences about how we've helped other people. And that's where you've got like a whole load of storytelling techniques. So the first thing I've said is like the thread, the shape of a story. But then the next thing is once you're in storytelling, you've got a load of techniques. Metaphor would be one that we're using right now to illustrate what you're talking about. So when I've said a red thread, that's just a metaphor based on a Greek myth of finding your way through complexity. It's lovely. And I think somehow a red thread is more meaningful to us than saying cut through complexity or whatever the literal words might be.
Yes, it is. Why though? I want to know why it is. I agree.
Because it totally hits a different bit of our brain. I mean, this is where we get into all of the neuroscience, which I really don't claim to pretend to know, but I believe it. That an image speaks to a different bit of our brain than a logical bit. Yeah. So metaphor is just one way of doing that. There are many other, quite a few other techniques in storytelling that go, okay, we're off. We're into that feeling.
That reminds me of something that I love doing is I was about to say I'm good at doing. I think I'm quite good at doing it, but is being able to articulate things differently, probably for the same impact of what you're talking about. And I probably without realizing, intuitively use metaphor, but it goes back to this concept of, have you heard of the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis? I know,
sounds great.
I'm literally just
I'm impressed.
Well done, Dolly. But no, I am just trying to prove myself. Shoulders up, my shoulders are down. I did it at university. It's pretty relaxed. But it's brilliant. It's basically what comes first, the chicken or the egg, with regards to our language and linguistic ability. So if I speak English, what's really interesting in the English language, if I drop the vase and it smashes, I'm the subject of the sentence. And so the way that the culture of English will remember it is that Dolly broke the vase. And it will always be remembered that she did it. So there's a blame because of the way that I'm the subject in the sentence. Yeah. Whereas in Spain, and if you are Spanish and I've got this wrong, please forgive me, but I did read it in a book, but I can't remember the book. If Dolly dropped the vase in Spain, the Spanish language makes the vase the subject, not Dolly. Brilliant. So the memory of the event is that the vase broke itself.
Brilliant.
Rather than Dolly did
Lucky
it.
Dolly.
Dolly gets a scot, which is jolly handy because I'm actually very clumsy. So it'd be a lot easier if I lived in Spain. But the point is, depending on your linguistic constructs,
I love that.
That's where the culture leans itself towards. And then you have, culture of blame or less blame, for example. But it's reframing and rephrasing things can help our brains understand things differently.
Lovely. I really like that. And you can feel that. I mean, so when I'm working with clients, I'm always looking at the quality of energy. Just in how someone is expressing something, vocally, physically, how energized is it? How free does it feel? I'm thinking of yesterday. There was a weird moment in my private equity client. It was just me and my client that I was working with. And she was going over a presentation she'd had to give, which was okay, but not great, about trying to get people on board with a program. And she was sort of talking through it. And then I noticed she just glanced up to her right and for a few seconds paused, and she was staring at a painting on the wall. And I stopped and went, what was happening there? What were you looking at in that painting? And she didn't sort of really know. She said, I just quite like the green. And went, okay, let's try something. Describe the painting. So she went and started describing the painting. And actually what the painting was a lake surrounded by trees. And in the middle of the lake, a small pagoda coming out of the lake with one ladder up and one person sitting on. And then she went, that's what this program's like. There's no one able to join it. It's like one person sitting on their own in a pagoda with one ladder, and we need to get more people in there.
Oh my gosh.
And it was so lovely.
Yeah.
And her quality of energy was so warm.
Yeah.
And actually, whether you'd actually use that in your private equity next presentation, I don't know. But the feeling back to, the atmosphere she created was like, I like this.
Yeah.
So that, for me, that's just metaphor. I mean, by the way, you can get, once you look for metaphors, they're bloody everywhere.
Yes.
Some of the best communicators are using them all the time. So, sorry, that's one of my favourites, but there's a whole load of other techniques you can do.
But what I love about that, though, just anyway, in one-to, if I help people do one-to-ones a lot. And so just sort of pushing this beyond, just trying to connect as leaders with their teams, when you've got someone in front of you who's a bit stiff, their shoulders are up and they're a bit cerebral and you want them to sort of soften up a bit, actually changing tack, taking them somewhere different, doing something different. Like, do you know what? Let's go to prep for our one-to-one, or let's just go for a walk. Like yesterday, I met an old mate and we had half an hour, and he said, he worked in a high-powered job and it's really intense. And I said, let's just go and walk and do something a bit funny. Should we play rock, paper, scissors just to kind of get you out of your head? Yeah. And to which he said no. But he said, but let's go to this free art gallery around the corner. So we went to an art gallery for not long, like 20 minutes, but then played a game. And there were all these boring ornaments in this art gallery, okay, like chalices and stuff. And big metal plates from... And
the vase just dropped. Dolly didn't push the vase.
And Dolly did not break the vase.
The vase broke itself.
100%.
Yeah.
But I said, and he's quite in his head. And I just said, if you had to pick one of these things to have on your bedside table for the rest of your life, what would it be? Go. And it was so fun.
Yeah.
And it was just taking you out of that raw space for half an hour. And then he went back into his big, important job with big, important clients and big, important deals. Yeah. And it's not to say that this is all like Coca-Cola, fizzy, wizzy, pop, ping pong tables in our break time, but there's something about seeing a painting and getting your brain in a different space can actually energize you to give you that cognitive space, I think, really, to be nudged to make better business decisions when you're back in the ring.
For sure. Sure. Yeah, lovely story. I had a somehow fantasy that he then stole the vase to have.
No, do you know what I chose for my bedside table? Which I was going to bed chuckling about. There's a massive chalice that was this big, and I thought I'd love to have my water in that every night. So midnight when you need some.
Yeah, lovely, fantastic.
Drinking from a chalice, be really fun. So going back to a story, getting people out, looking at paintings, going, just because that piqued her interest. But how do you help people if they are stiff when they're presenting and they're practicing in front of you, like, what do you practically do? Do you tell them straight up? Do you get them to do exercises? Like, what do you do?
I mean, most people are stiff in some shape or form, and it might be quite a subtle stiff, intensity of gaze or voice having a certain level of tension in it.
Right.
So, I mean, on one level, there is just something about energy. I trained as an actor, and we spend hours and hours and hours and hours, and I mean years, actually looking at not being stiff, looking at how to be present physically and vocally. I remember going to drama school and spending the first year lying on my back, building this muscle called the diaphragm muscle, so that when you breathe, your voice has got ease and power in it. So partly there's just like physical stuff.
Wow.
Which you can't necessarily teach immediately, but energy is the first. I mean, it's a good coverall word. It's the first thing that sort of shows up. So you need to see it, you need to feel it, and you need to get people aware of, where am I tightening? That's one thing. I think for me, when people connect to their content meaningfully, that painting, that vase, whatever that is, you naturally connect. Yeah. So I think it's quite hard not to be stiff if you're reciting a list of 5 bullet points.
Yeah.
That's quite a hard thing to be engaged with. When those bullet points are actually placed in a thread that says we're going on a journey, and and they're making sense, and then when they're brought alive by using different storytelling techniques, it's easy. Energy just flows.
Yeah. It does. I mean, I work with an engineering company who love a bullet point. They love a PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And when I get them to do any presentation or PowerPoint, I go, there's 2 rules. And they're already busy getting their laptops out and their Sharpies for the bullet points. And I go, I'm not allowed to see 1 bullet point, not one, or you fail. And the second thing is, you're not allowed to use PowerPoint.
Great.
And they're like,
bliss.
Oh my gosh.
How disconcerting for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you have to draw, you have to do, I want to see shapes or drawings or different ways of using a pen and lines on paper. And it's hilarious. They still do it the way they've always have, and they just shove a stick man in the corner to shut me up sometimes. But actually, it is quite fun. Sometimes there are these different approaches, like visual language. They will draw pictures or shapes to emphasize the kind of presentation they want to do. And it's not saying do that all the time, is it? But it's pushing on that pedal to get them out of it being quite so linear.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you were going to help someone with personal impact, so just going back a minute, people often talk about their personal impact within companies. So if I work in a big corporate, like, what's my branding? What's my personal impact, Ollie, in this company? Or take me as, leading my own business. What would be your sort of 3, I'm really putting you on the spot here now. What would be your 3 key takeaways for me to consider and apply if I'm thinking about my personal impact?
Okay. So it's apt that we're doing this on a podcast because it's audio. And out of that word audio come 2 other words that you would hear, which is authenticity and authority.
Oh, wow.
And I like the paradox and the sort of slight polarity of those 2 words, to be authentic and to have authority. And those are the lenses that I would always bring up to you, Dolly, or whoever it is in this company, and go, how do those show up? So authenticity is a huge word, and we could, it's connected to kind of both sort of deep our soul of how much authenticity we're going to show. And it's also a very simple thing of like, is that the same person I know from the pub? So it's kind of up to you where you go with that, but that can involve how much vulnerability to show, how much sincerity, all of that. That's great.
Yeah.
And you need to own it, and to take your confident place in where you want to stand.
Yeah.
And sometimes those two qualities can be almost paradoxical, authenticity and authority. Sometimes they completely overlap and you go, wow. So that's what I would say to look at. That's what I would question.
I love it, because I think there's a lot there. So, because I think all great wisdom and truth is held in tension. You know, it's this whole thing I see in business as a slight side thought, but you know, this whole thing of support and challenge. Sometimes it's like just be dogmatic and transactional to get things done at the sake of support, but then other people are just like, oh, let's just be supportive all the time, but they're never challenging. So you've got passive aggression, and so you need to have two opposing truths together. It's like riding a bike.
I love that, Dolly.
Yeah.
Do you know why? Because
why?
Ingredient number 2, I've talked about polarity. Ingredient number 2 that I bang on about in storytelling is find the polarities.
Oh, I love that. Say more.
Yeah. So it's exactly what you said. All great truths are held in tension. I love the way you've said it, and actually that's why I like the name of your company, your brand, which is Extraordinary, because there's tension in that.
Oh my gosh,
which
I love
are
it.
you?
So there's a company, a production company, and guess what their strapline is? And I'm so jealous because I want it on my website.
Oh God!
It's just a black page with white writing, and it just says "seriously fun."
Brilliant. There we go. Exactly. They've got it. And the black and the white and the
Because actually, in my business, something I've really struggled with, and I'm sure many other people who run their own businesses or run their own sort of strategies or leading their own strategies, it's so hard to sometimes feel like nudged in one side into one place, like Simon Sinek stuff, like find your why, what is your mission statement? And it's hard when we're human because we're not just one thing.
Exactly.
You know, I don't just want to be a fun, inspiring speaker. I actually have a lot of intellect and want to bring a lot of challenge. But do I want to just do that? So how do I bring intellect and fun together? You know, it sometimes feels like you've got to pick a lane. And so when you're actually playing with polarity and, you know, these dualisms.
Yeah, exactly.
It's great that they can be held together.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. And it's brilliant. It's energizing. You know, I mean, I can feel the energy already, the kind of, as you say, but in that tension. Yes. And all the greats have done it. War and peace. It's fascinating because of that. It's not just a book about war or just a book about tea rooms in Moscow.
Yes.
It's war and peace.
Yes.
To be
and
or
you
not
can't
to
have
be.
one without the other, otherwise they don't exist, can they?
Exactly.
And you know, like with black and white, the opposite of black and white, you probably know this, but have you heard of the opposite of black and white? What it is? What do you think it is?
The opposite of black and white.
So if we use the context of black and white thinking, what would be the opposite of black and white?
Oh, I see. Multi-dimensional colours.
Oh, you're so clever.
What?
Most people say grey. So you're absolutely spot on. But that is the most common thing as people go, well, it's grey, which is actually a real compromise of either. And so none of us want to live a compromised existence. But the actual opposite of black and white is the colour spectrum, exactly,
Lovely.
like you say.
Lovely.
And so it's experiencing lots of different things and being able to, you know, we're very extreme in our language when we're struggling and when we're in cognitive overload. We go into this tunnel vision and we become black and white in our thinking, and it's either a good or a bad presentation, or it's either they've got the joie de vivre or they haven't, or they're a great entrepreneur or they're not, or he's just the mark or he's not, or she is a great boss or she's not. We're so quick to scan and put things in a one-dimensional space. But actually, my dad always says nothing's ever as good or as bad as you think. And so no one's ever brilliant, but no one's ever terrible. Yeah. They're all just rather ordinary. But I say that in a really refreshing way. Like, ordinary is colourful. It's all sorts of things, you know, and it's being able to just, going back to the authenticity of being able to go, it's okay, me being me. Yeah, I talk a little bit too much. That's something I need to watch for. Yeah. It doesn't make me a bad leader. Or I'm a little bit quiet, I'm an introvert, but that doesn't make me bad at sales. You know, it's just these it's being able to shoulders down, isn't it? And relax
Yeah.
into the story of who we are and find our colours within that space to perform well.
Lovely. Lovely. Yeah. Well said. Yeah.
But going back, because I'm really interested in this. So thinking of almost like a Venn diagram is how I pictured it, but it's being able to hold authority and authenticity, these almost polarities together. What else to help someone with personal branding and considering their own story of personal brand?
For me, it's probably just then working out what's the story that underpins what you do. It's something about purpose.
Yes.
Yesterday, I'll give you another. This is another story. I mean, which we all know is what I call anecdotal. So people and places and pictures. So if you can get into content that is people and places and pictures, it's interesting. So I'm going to answer your question by that. Yesterday, I was working with a guy, Cuban American. We were online, little group. His job is representing, speaking on behalf of the airline industry. And he's quite scary because he's quite adversarial, because his job is constantly fighting up against governmental bodies on behalf of airlines. So he's quite, and he knows that. That's what he says. He's got a lot of authority, knowledgeable, all of that. He told a story.
A lot of positional authority, just to clarify.
Yeah, thank you. Good. Yeah. I think it's positional, and he has. And that's his thing.
Yeah.
Strong energy, direct. A bit what we're talking about. We were playing around with storytelling, and we're talking about stories. In fact, it was literally just an exercise. He told a story of growing up by the airport in Cuba as a kid and watching aeroplanes take off and not knowing where they would ever go.
Gosh.
And then, aged 4, his family got out. And he remembered getting on that aeroplane. He remembered sitting by the window and seeing his house, seeing his island, and then seeing blue water and just going, this other thing. Now, as you can imagine, that's his reason for being. His reason for being is not just I represent the airlines. His reason for being is about, in his head, freedom, aspiration.
Yeah.
So actually, when he's representing airlines, if that is underneath, that's his purpose, that's his story, that gives so much more depth to what he's doing, rather than I'm going to argue the regulation on this piece of legislation with you. If that story's underneath, and I'm not saying he needs to tell that exact story there, but that needs to be part of his reason for being.
Why do you think that story about freedom needs to be there in the can, I suppose, like of his in him, in order to be able to do the other stuff? Why is it important that he has that there?
I'm going to go to a metaphor now. It's like the underwater propeller. You don't see it, okay? But if you're arguing regulation for the regulation's sake, that's all you are. And there's not a lot of power. If underneath the water, there's this propeller that says, I'm here because aviation to me is about freedom and opportunity.
Yeah.
You will argue that differently.
So I've got an anecdote. I have children, and there are 2 battles that I'm facing with one of them. One is they want to collect this collector's card thing, a bit like Pokemon. And my ex-husband is really, really strong on, he doesn't want him to collect them. I don't really care. I mean, I just don't care. But my ex does, and we parent together, single focus. So I have to kind of adopt that mechanically and fight the fight, but I don't have a why underneath it at all. I just don't care. So I find it quite exhausting, and I probably don't parent it as well as I could. Whereas there's another battle going on, which is he's learning an instrument, the baritone, which is so random and rare. It's a small tuba. And he hates it and wants to give up. And I'd love to save the money. However, I really believe in resilience. And I'm really worried that children aren't learning resilience. And I'm worried that my children are brought up with too much comfort in the West, and they need to be exposed to stories they don't like in order to build up the resilience muscle. So every time we have an argument or a fight about the baritone, or I don't want to pay the bill, I have that why underneath it going, no, this is really important because it's going to teach him resilience, which is a core value I really like and want. So that makes those arguments so much easier. So that's what we're talking about.
Lucky son. What a good, I was looking at you as you were saying that, and the energy, again, we're talking about, you can feel the difference. I would know that. Your son will know that mum really bloody means this about resilience, and what a great thing you are teaching him. He would feel that because that underwater propeller is there.
Yes.
Whereas I absolutely, and he will absolutely know, she doesn't really, she's not really that bothered about the cards.
I just don't care about
We'll
the cards.
both nod, we'll both pretend that it's not a good thing, but
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But it's hard to know your why sometimes, and hard, some of us don't have a freedom story or something. And my business, what's my why? And it's, I get my knickers in a bit of a knot sometimes with it because I'm not quite sure sometimes what it is. And so how do you help businesses? I'm working with a business at the moment that for 25 years has been in a certain place doing really well, but the story that's got them here isn't going to get them there. They don't have a story for the future. They've kind of done it. So the question is, do we close it down, or do we get it a buyout, or do we attach ourselves into a bigger story to keep us going? And, stories are hard to sometimes connect with in our own lives. How would you speak into those spaces?
Yeah, I mean, they're big things, Dolly. I'm curious why you... I'm surprised that you're questioning what your motives for why you do what you do. Well,
my problem is it's not that there's a lack, there's too many.
Brilliant. Good. Like what?
Like, so it's a metaphor, but someone told me once, and I am very tall, by the way, but it's not meant to be about my height, but I'm a tall poppy. I just know that I'm not meant to be like everyone else, and I'm just meant to be kind of big.
Good.
And I like thinking big things, and I like doing big things, and I like being in rooms full of people who are stuck in small rooms and going, hey, Brilliant. You can stand up, we can think big. It doesn't mean we have to play big in every area, but let's just have a break from mundane things and think big. I don't know. That's enough.
I love
of
that.
a why.
No, I love that. It's a great metaphor, and it suits you, and I can see it. So then my question would be, what's been the challenge or the problem? Because stories always have a failure, a challenge, a problem, and that's what makes it interesting. Well, being a tall poppy.
So, I think, without criticizing anyone, because obviously attention comes from a place where you might have felt oppressed or held back. And so, as I say this, there's no blame or victim. It's just a script that I played. But I'd been a vicar's wife for 18 years, and there's a lot of oughts and shoulds around what that role looks like. And I didn't mind kind of being a bit different in that space, but I almost did it as a kind of rebellious thing of like, ooh, look, I'm a vicar's wife, but I wear tutus. Aren't I crazy?
Yeah.
And actually, it was a much more for me a journey of recognizing my intellect. And I've had intellectual insignificance, I think, my whole life. I went to very clever schools, and so I always felt less than. And something in my intellect just went, I'd relied too much on my personality and not enough probably on my character. And my character is one of, it's different to personality, right? And my character is one of I really value strength. I really like strength, but I really recognize weakness, and I am weak. So it's not that I'm so strong, or I only like strong people. It's not that. It's, War and Peace. It's weakness and strength. They fascinate
Beautiful.
me.
Yeah.
And so it's that. And I think it was just waking up to, I want to be stronger intellectually.
Yeah. And that's so right that you're then doing what you're doing. So it totally makes sense. Being a tall poppy and the joy of that and waving in the sun and having that is lovely. and having spent a lot of time being told, don't go down, be small, don't speak up, whatever
100%.
that is. And therefore, you doing a podcast, you're being a tall poppy in the sun and saying, here, here's some ways that I can help you. So for me, that's a really compelling offering and gives permission, if you can do it and you've worked out how to do it, for others to come with you.
Well, that's really validating. Thanks,
Yeah.
because sometimes I think if you were meant to have not meant to, but like to engage with your story, we all probably know it, but do we kind of rest in it and let that authentically hold us and have authority with it? Because sometimes I think it's a bit like being in a hot tub. It's going to be another metaphor.
Well, I love
or a
it.
bath.
Yeah.
We're in the right valley with you and me talking about stories and metaphors. But when you're in a hot tub, it's really hot when you first get in, but then you kind of don't realize how hot it is, or a bath, and you don't know your own temperature when you're in it all the time, which harkens back to ordinary. Like our ordinariness is actually someone else's hot. Or someone else's cold, isn't it? And that's why we need to borrow from one another collaboratively to see what extra we can get from different sectors and different experiences to add into our ordinary. And so we can think our own story is very ordinary. Who would want to know?
Exactly.
But it's just we're used to it.
And I think for me, a lot of your story has become clear by saying the challenges that you had. So for me, I'm always looking with the story, not just to go, what's your purpose and meaning, but what's the challenge? What's the nightmare? What's the difficulty? What's the stuff you've had to overcome? Because it's back to that. That's where the tension comes. That's what's interesting.
In business, when I do strategy days with teams, and it's different language, but we're hacking the tree down in different ways, but in similar ways. My emphasis won't be on story, but it will be about, where do we want to be in 3 years' time? And where are we now? Funny enough, the word audit is one of my most favorite words, because I think we have to have such a reverence for that word, because it really is just taking a real fact check of the impact I've got right now. What's it like on the other side of me? Let's really audit that. Let's get some real data around how I'm doing, how I'm performing, how our team is doing, how articulate we are. Because people get lost, don't they, in just the kind of hypothetical. And then I talk about what are our sticking points. But I guess what you're saying, and I like it because it's got more metaphor in it, is in our story, like, what are the things that we have overcome to get us to this point? And that's something to help us find our why, isn't it?
For sure. I mean, one of my favourite exercises, and I always feel blessed when you do that, is just to hear stories of challenge, stories of failure, because that's what defines us. Stories are not just about getting to this wonderful home place. It's about the challenge, the failure, the difficulty, and to be able to articulate that. It's so interesting and it's so defining.
I mean, I have learnt so much more in my business about my failings than my learnings. Brené Brown, I often reference her, but she talks about FFT. Have you heard of it?
And I like the sound of it.
You're in.
Yeah.
It's a rude word, but she says it's fucking first time, and it's this whole thing of leaning in to a failing, like, the fucking first time I did that, the fucking first time I did that, and we have many FFT experiences of just like, that presentation was dreadful. I did a talk the other day, a few months ago, and I was so excited about it. It was a great break for me, and I did a bad job.
Damn, what happened?
Yeah, I just went in and I wasn't anchored and I wasn't stilled. Various reasons. I just made choices probably to be too busy and not really understand the brief, and relied on my charisma. Rather than actually my authority. There was too much like woo and not enough presence in it. And I came out of it being absolutely gutted. But FFT.
You'll never do that again.
I'll never do it again. But I'll probably be 50% better every time now. I mean, just having a number on it, than had it gone quite well, where I probably would have got a little bit better. So I'm probably a better speaker now from that failing.
Brilliant.
But I need some
Brilliant.
I need to test drive that theory.
Yeah. Pause. Pause is such a tiny word, and it's like a wormhole that if you use it and go into it, it's a blessing.
Yeah.
If people always sort of say, what's the quickest, biggest win you can get?
Yeah.
Pause.
I love it.
Breathe. Connect. Listen. Look out there. So I suspect, Dolly, the next time you do that, you'll pause is what will bring the authority.
I agree. I'm pausing now.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But no, as I'm just mindful of our time, and I want to bring us into land, and it's been such a rich conversation. I mean, just some really fun thoughts and things. That we touched on polarity and challenges, and our failures, that they all sew into our story, don't they? And just thinking about our brains and getting out of that logical linear space. And for many of our clients, they are cognitively stuck in that. So this is a great conversation to just pull them out of that.
Good.
What I like to ask my guests is, what do you have to hand? I'm putting you on the spot. Or I often say, what item do you have in your home? But I haven't given you warning for that. But what item, or what kind of metaphor, if you want, defines extraordinary leadership to you?
What item defines extraordinary leadership? Okay, I'm going to show you here, which is I like that. It's a gate post, okay, which my father dug out of his garden in Devon, and it's ancient. I mean, the wood itself is rock hard.
Wow.
And what he's done, just for your listeners, is drill 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 holes in the top.
Yeah.
Which he said burnt his drill bits. He was drilling so hard because it was so rock hard.
Wow.
In order that I can use it as a pen holder. So now I have this wonderful array of different coloured pens here. Why is that extraordinary? So for me, it's solid.
Yes.
It's really, really solid, and it's grounded. And extraordinary leadership, I would want to be like that stake in the ground, just trustworthy.
Yes.
But I also like the fact that I've got all these different multicoloured, fun pens, and it's useful. So I think what I'm saying is grounded, useful, and fun. That's what defines extraordinary leadership.
Grounded, fun, and useful. But again, just getting out of your mind to think about what makes a great leader it's fun, right? That's a strong, powerful image. I love it.
Yeah.
And again, it's holding those polarities together. It gives us permission to see something like that.
Yeah.
I want one. I want one of those cool pen holders.
Well, keep digging in your garden in Sussex, and you
really
may find
one.
Well, yeah.
I'll go and look for a
gate
gatepost and then break my drill on it.
Exactly.
Noah, thank you so much for all your wisdom and for sharing so freely. It's been so fun. And if people want to get in touch with you, how can they go about it?
My website, which is noamaxwell.com.
We'll put that in the show notes. Yeah.
Great, lovely. It's Noah without an H, which is the strange anomaly.
I love it.
There's
it's
a
quirky.
story in that. That's it. Yeah.
Brilliant. Oh, well, thanks, Noah, so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you.
Pleasure. Thank you, Dolly.
Great. I hope you found today's conversation as rich and as insightful as I did. If you want to go deeper into today's subject, then do reach out to my guest or myself in the show notes. And if you are wanting to add extra into your ordinary of leadership, of team performance, business strategy, or just your personal life, then do buy my book, The Extraordinary Leader. You can find it on my website at dollywaddell.com, where you've got access straight away to 12 immediate tactics that will really dial things up for you in a really manageable way. You'll get paradigm shifts. You'll be able to do it with your teams, even with your family. And if you'd like me to come and speak in your businesses or in your workplaces, then do get in touch, because I have got a few keynotes all around this to inspire and motivate performance to go to new levels and new heights.